This is Tea with Botha.
Welcome once again to Tea with Botha, where we discuss what ordinarily is unconventional. And today we will be looking at the next coming few months will be faced with local government elections, and in a year's time we'll be faced with both provincial national elections, about governance, about administration. Now, who best or who is best suited to help us to navigate, to traverse these topics is none other than Professor Busani Ngcaweni, who, and I must say that we are blessed and privileged with him, who has served two presidents as a chief of staff. He served for Professor Busani, served under the leadership of President Kgalema Motlanthe and President Thabo Mbeki as chief of staff. You would in fact agree with me that there's this wealth of knowledge that he brings. But then there's been a transition from serving these two presidents in our country. He then moved on to establish, I think, what essentially or served as a DG of the National School of Governance in our country. So this is important in for us to understand and to grapple with issues of power, and to grapple with issues of, I mean, one can even say this delivery. So Professor Ngcaweni is here to help us. But as we speak, about a year ago, then a few months ago, he then moved on to head an Africa, to have an Africa public policy at the University of Johannesburg. And he's here to tell us more about his journey. I mean, was he, what made him to, I mean, join the public service? What is it? What was the spark? What interested him? And he's here. Busani, welcome and thank you for joining us. Who is Professor Ngcaweni? Who is Busani?
No, thank you for having me. It's good to have a tea. We do it Sunday. On Sundays, people need to sit under a tree and have serious conversations. Either whether there's a warm drink like tea or something cold. So I'm glad to be here. Well, Busani Ngcaweni is someone from Durban, Enanda. As most people will identify me with. So I, grew up there, spent years. I also spent time with my grandmother's hood, the rural area called the Dwedwe, very close to Inanda. So in 20 minutes, I'm there. So those I regard to be my home until today. I spend a lot of time there. My kids also spend time there. And then some years later, I moved to Johannesburg. It was in the year 2000, actually, that I moved to Johannesburg as a researcher. Started working there for different small research firms. And later on, coincidentally, I found myself in government offices.
And the president in particular?
Yeah, in the president in particular. I mean, it was never planned that way.
What happened?
To be honest with you, I mean, I never really dreamt of working for government as I was growing up. I'm unsure as to what dreams did I have, but I never really thought about working for government. In fact, I am sure about this because I've never applied for a job in government until I got into the presidency. I didn't even know where government was advertising its positions. It didn't really matter to me. Government was not an employer of choice where I was looking for a job. I was looking for a job in research organizations,
That's just terrible.
which is where I thought, I would find something worthwhile because I had been trained in that background. And then sometime in 2005, I was seconded to work in the presidency from Umsobomvu Youth Fund. And I never went back until 2020. That's how I got there. It was secondment. And after a few years, then there was a position and I was encouraged to apply. And that was the first job I applied for. And I joined like permanently after the secondment of 2 years, so 2007. I now become formally a president's employee. And that was the first time I applied for a job.
You were the chief staff?
No, when I joined, I was working in the policy unit in the presidency. There was a policy unit, 2000 when I joined, it was the middle of the year.
Who was the president then?
The president then was Thabo Mbeki, and the deputy president was Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka. So part of the programs that we were working on, we were supporting the deputy president. She was leading a program called the ASGISA, as well as the GIPSA. So we worked, support the country's economic development program at a time. And 2 years later, I found myself working in the office of the deputy president in Mlambo Ngcuka, and then that's where the journey of becoming a chief of staff began. And I was lucky in a sense that I was not a chief of staff who was only responsible for making sure that there's a diary, that logistics are resolved, and so on. There was a greater expectation that I must be involved in the content, in the strategy and technical detail of what the office was doing, as well as the presidency as a whole. And so that is how I ended up in that space, and then transitioned from one block to another in the private office, moving from a policy unit until I left in 2020.
And what does a chief of staff do?
Well,
I mean, this is a layman's. I mean, imagine people are drinking tea with us. They say, look, recently there's been a chief of staff in the now suspended Minister of Police, Senzo Mchunu, Nkabin, the chief of staff. What does and I guess that listening to the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry, he did not know. The Lieutenant General Mkwanazi says that he gave him a call to say, what does Ushutini when you were the chief of staff? Yeah. So it's not only me, even the person who was offered the job.
Well, in the context of the presidency, being a chief of staff or a head of office of the president or deputy president is a very weighty responsibility, unlike typical ministries. Because in the presidency, it is designed different. We're not a line function department. We're a department that is responsible for coordinating the work of the whole of government through the support of the president and the deputy president. And also in the presidency, because the position of chief of staff is a deputy director-general level, it's a DDG level, it also carries the responsibility of leadership in the organization because we are part of top management. You are making decisions about and for the entire organization, whereas in the typical department, a chief of staff may not sit in top management position. In the presidency, you have to do that. So typically, of course, there will be issues of diary management. Those are given. It's a first responsibility you have. And we have a large infrastructure, support officials who are responsible for that. They are working on logistics and so on. And then you have to ask yourself, what is the political program of this principal? Remember that they are politicians, so we call it a political program. And then how is this political program constructed? If you were to look at this political program, if you look at a diary of a president or a deputy president, what will it tell us about these people and what their priorities are? So it's a very important instrument of strategy, the management of the diary, not just for the logistics point of view, but for the content in particular. These officials are also, the politicians are also responsible for particular programs which they must deliver or they must lead as president or deputy president. In the instance of the deputy president, there's a series of delegations that are given to the deputy president. One of them, I'll mention a few, is the management of the national AIDS response. So what is called the AIDS program of the country, which is a SANAC. Now, in that capacity, as a chairperson of SANAC, if you work in the office of the deputy president, you cannot survive there unless you learn deeply what is the National AIDS Response Program about. You have to understand the language, the strategy, you understand the political economy of it, locally and globally, as if yourself you work in a ministry of health. In order for the chair of this structure to be effective in what they do. Because we are advising, you are responsible for providing strategic advice to the political principal. So it's not just coordinating that the meeting should happen. What goes into the meeting? What turns on it? And what should be the expected outcome? I mean, I personally always had a view in that role that I always wanted to have a sense of what the outcome of every meeting. I never went to a meeting without carrying a pen. Khalema Motlanthe said, anyone who goes into a meeting without carrying a pen, you must know that that person is not serious. That's not the type of a person you must spend your time with because it means you intend leaving a meeting with nothing. Because you can never have a serious meeting where you walk in without a pen. It means we are not interested in taking any notes or any knowledge or making any contribution. So that's one of the things that you have to do. You must be clear about what is expected, because you have to prepare the principal to be clear about how to steer this meeting. It cannot be by chance. So when there's an outcome at the end of the meeting, we as officials must have been able to anticipate that, must have been able to advise and guide even how you structure the agenda and how you prepare everybody else towards a particular outcome. I mean, I would recall an instance where there were big debates, very difficult debates in Sanak about the introduction of medical male circumcision as part of the package of the reproductive health program that could help in
reducing
in spreading the pandemic.
the 60%.
Yes, it was a very, very difficult,
Discussion.
What
makes it difficult? Was it during the time of President Mbeki?
No, it was post that. It's because you were now beginning a conversation that could, unless it is managed properly, it can go wrong. Why? Because there will be people who say, no, but this is culture. And then we are introducing it in some communities where we say it's culture, don't get involved because we're now saying it's medical. Then it means we are going to interfere with our own cultural practice. And when you introduce it in other spaces, like in the KZN, where it has been suspended for long, where it is done voluntary without part of a particular culture, then there's the issue of what are you trying to do? In fact, when they did it in Swaziland, they started, Eswatini, they introduced it in Eswatini. It was not successful. Ours was more successful.
You mean the male circumcision?
Yeah, because our approach as officials was to study the social dynamics of the country, to study the power structures, and be able to guide and say, Deputy President, as you lead this program, there are a few things you need to do. One, you must engage with traditional leaders in a particular way because they see themselves as custodian of these practices, so that you then reduce the possibility of them ever making a statement against it. Once they embrace it, once they become champions, you have opened up space to then engage who will be beneficiaries on how to implement the program. That is a responsibility of someone at a chief of staff, at least if it's at a DDG level, that is what you are expected to do in a presidency environment, because these are very complex things. There's many other programs tried locally and, and internationally where political leaders were ill-prepared for those content point of view, strategy, understanding the politics and so on, and those things didn't work out. So part of like SANAC with its own successes came as a result of the officials being marshaled to know how to effectively support the chair of SANAC to be able to engage on difficult debates, including this one.
Where were you during the President Mbeki's the so-called AIDS denial?
No, I joined late in 2005.
And how did you find that?
And when I joined, the Pumzile Mlamungcuka was a chair of
SANAC.
SANAC. There were friction, of course, with civil society, but we were able to navigate that space. The tensions were reduced during that period. There was wide consultation, and the treatment program began during that period. So by the time other deputy president joined, there was already some distance that had been traveled. And as you know, even with all the politics that were there at the time, because of how the deputy president I worked with were handling the debates, there were no statements necessarily against
Phumzile.
well, with her, and she handed over the program to Baleka Mbete, so I worked with her. She became, for a year, deputy president, handed to Motlanthe, and then to President Ramaphosa as well. And they managed the program, I think, relatively well. The tensions were reduced. There's still a lot of politics around it, but they were managed. When there was an issue of treatment, we knew very little about it because some of it was really clinical work. But we have to get on top of the debate about how then will the health sector now begin to expand, treatment. And there were big issues about how they allocate work to health workers, the type of work they will do. Even when we were introducing the medical male circumcision was in a clinic facility where it might not have been provided for before. How do you provide it, and how do you make sure that there's task shifting, where there are people who shift their responsibilities and they begin to do this type of work? We had to be aware and to anticipate, because if we don't do so, the following day you could have a letter from some of the unions, and you may get then catch the deputy president unsighted because you didn't prepare or anticipate those types of things.
Interesting.
So that's the complexity of the work that be done behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And in some instances, the leaders themselves don't know that. And in fact, they don't need to know that. All they need to know is to trust the system and to trust the process, and that we are making sufficient preparations for them to be able to provide the leadership required.
Wonderful. And Busani, moving from the presidency to National School of Governance, how was it? And what were you doing there?
All right. So 2018, look, I had been a chief of staff to a lot of politicians.
I mean, a lot of.
So it
that was, am I right to say, President?
So this was Mlambo Ngcuka,
Deputy President Ngcuka,
and it was Mbete.
Deputy President Mbete.
It was Motlanthe.
Deputy President Motlanthe.
It was Ramaphosa.
Deputy President then.
Yes, and then even for about 4 months, Didi Mabuza, so I was managing both the office of the president and deputy president at the time.
Didi Mabuza, may his soul rest in peace.
Yeah. And Motlanthe, yeah. Because he took a bit longer to stabilize his office, so I was managing both offices for a couple of months. And I had made a decision way before 2018 that I thought I needed to transition back into the area of interest, which was research. So 2018, I re-established the policy unit, which had been closed down in 2009. So that went on 2018, and then 2020, I thought I needed to try something else. And I had been clear about how I want to move into my career. And so I joined the National School of Government. And this was the second time I think I applied for a job.
And you joined and appointed as a DG?
As a DG, yeah.
And you served?
Look, I had been a DDG for 13 years, so I think
some new challenges.
It's needed to, Because I never led an institution on my own, so I thought it's useful that I must also have an experience of being an accounting officer myself.
As a DG?
As a DG, yeah.
And you was it with Kosi, or was it during the GNU?
No, this was prior to GNU. This is 2020.
2020.
So my joining of the School of Government coincides with the COVID pandemic. So I joined in March, and then there was a pandemic actually a few weeks later, which came with its own intricacies and so on. But the transition was not difficult, in a sense that, firstly, I thought I had done my duty. I've done my service at the presidency. I had certain privileges in the presidency, of amongst them traveling, not just to travel and take pictures for social media, but of understanding how other countries work, what makes other governments more effective than others. So I had a great exposure. I think I traveled over 50 countries when I was at the presidency, and I always carried a pen, as Kgalema Motlanthe had advised, that you must always carry a pen. Of course, later I left the pen. I had a phone so I could type whatever I was observing in those countries. And so I thought when I joined the National School of Government, one must recall some of the observations and learnings from all these countries I had a privilege of.
What does the School of Governance do? What is it about?
It's an important institution. And in fact, I say to people, the National School of Government was not established by me. It was there before. It had its own challenges.
But just more about, do you agree with me?
It was underutilized.
Oh, not there.
Yeah, it was underutilized. Well, I mean, I make this argument really, and with the greatest of humility. The National School of Government was well governed, in a sense that when I joined it, unlike many DGs, I didn't have to be fixing problems in supply chain. I didn't have to be chasing people who were stealing in the organization. That is not the common experience of directors generals. So the success, therefore, the National School of Government, I always qualified. The time that many CEOs and DGs spend trying to rebuild the supply chain management section of an organization, I didn't spend that time. I spent the time on the core business of the organization. So it helped that I went into an institution that, in fact, had an engine which was not really a bad engine. It needed to be serviced, it needed to be tweaked, and it had the potential to do more than what it was doing. it was just underutilized. The people who were driving it, they were not driving it to a cliff. They were just driving it, as if it was a TERS, if I could use that. If I could
That's used by the African National Congress leader, the Secretary General. That the appointment of the coordinators in KZN. We thought we had appointed Ferrari. We had appointed
it has. But the retort was great from Mike Maboyakulu that the TERS is a people's car. It is reliable. It's got endurance. It can.
Is that the retort?
This was the retort.
I missed that one.
Yeah. So in my instance, I had to take a TERS and convert it for it to be able to navigate all the terrains that it was able to do. So the National School of Government does very important programs. One of the programs which was approved prior to me joining, and mine was to initiate my start, is a pre-entry exams for people into senior management positions. If you are moving to a senior management position in government, since I joined the NSG, you have to write a pre-entry assessment, which is implemented by the NSG. In fact, I can tell you that there was so much compliance with it. And in fact, when we wrote in 2022 and introduced the professionalization framework and it was approved by cabinet, we proposed that this pre-entry assessment called Nyukela. Nyukela, step up.
Okay, Nyukela like in Zulu.
Like in Zulu, step up. We said even advisors and even chief of staff of ministers must do it. If you're in a senior management position,
starting from
you go through the process like a director level. So you go through all the pre-assessments and interviews and so on. However, you cannot be appointed unless you have it. Currently, it's called an assessment, but it is migrating into a full government examination. Why is it? By implementing Nyukela, we understood that there was over 99% compliance, which is great. We now have a sense of how the market responds to it. We have a sense of what its impact is as people are doing a Nyukela. And so the National School of Government now is introducing some more rigor, more psychometric testing into it to make it credible. Eventually, by 2030, this pre-entry assessment called Nyukela, by 2030, it will actually close some of the porous borders in the recruitment processes. What you are referring to, Madlanga Commission and so on, and there were several commissions and public hearings that we saw.
The new
well, even the ones that were happening late last year with the interviews of NTPP and so on.
Yeah.
What they tell us that there are people who carry big titles, but in fact who have no understanding of their responsibility.
They don't know what they're doing.
And the weight that comes with the responsibility. Some of them are enjoying the pomp and ceremony of a particular position, but in terms of appreciating the weight and the responsibility you carry in society, they don't. So Nyukela, the ultimate Nyukela, like a government exam like they do in India and China, when it is fully implemented, because it is progressively moved towards there, it will help close some of the porous borders in HR. Because the recruitment system in South Africa and the public sector has got porous borders. And that is why we have people who may have qualifications on paper, but who behave so underwhelmingly in interviews and commissions as we saw in the last 3 months of 2020.
Will it also address these extreme looting? I mean, the thieving, Busani?
Well, to an extent, look.
Will it do that?
To an extent, there is a the most difficult government exam in the world is in China, and it's been administered for over 2,000 years. And then the second most difficult government exam is in India.
Both of them?
It takes 2 to 3 years to prepare for those examinations.
Government examinations?
Yeah, it takes 2 to 3 years to prepare.
You said it, India and China?
Yes, those two. There's several other countries that have those exams. You have to prepare. Well, in China, you have to write an exam to go to university, but to work for government, you have to pass these exams in addition to the imposition on continuing learning and professional development. It is compulsory. And in fact, you may not be promoted if you don't go through those. But the point I'm making is the porous borders in HR will narrow if you introduce this, because we can determine suitability and unsuitability of people. Of course, we cannot close it completely, because even in the two countries I've quoted, as we have seen recently, there is still corruption there. We see ministers and army generals being arrested and so on. So the whole point is how do you narrow these porous borders such that you have a kind of a sense that the majority of those who have moved beyond the HR border are people who've got some sense of credibility. When you don't have these type of pre-assessments, then in fact the borders are wide open, anything goes. And we see the spectacle when we read newspapers of how municipal managers, DGs, HODs, CEOs, chairs of boards,
How they steal.
how the kind of stuff they do. In fact, I argue that we must be as worried about poor performance and be concerned as we are concerned about corruption. I say this because in the 20 years I spent in government, I encountered great talent, and it's there. There are people who are doing the best that they can. Of course, in some cases, it's best talent, but poorly managed, so they're not getting the best out of those people. But I also encountered a lot of incompetence where you wonder, how did the board appoint this CEO?
Is it not because of the ANC's policy of cut rate deployment?
In some cases, by the way, even if that is the case, in some cases, there will have been 2 or 3 cadres who qualified in some cases, and they go for the lowest. In fact, I call it the lowest uncommon denominator in some cases. So yes, that might be the case, but there are several cases where you hear stories that in fact, Ngcaweni was not the only one, was not the only candidate who might have been considered to be a deployee necessarily. But it's because even as we narrow the borders in HR, there are other borders that remain wide open, which is who becomes a chair of a board of these 740 odd public entities in South Africa. We are too concerned about the big ones because they have an impact on the economy, Transnet, Eskom, and so on. Even at a local government level, many agencies where you realize, man, this is a hairdresser. This hairdresser is now chairing this entity of this local government. And this is a 3 billion entity being chaired by, and I'm nothing against the hairdressers. The point is the complexity of governing this institution. There is a point at which it will overwhelm this particular.
This municipal manager is handling a budget of billions, and he probably is like me, who may not even understand what is 2 plus 2.
Well, let me tell you, one thing, to be honest, and because maybe I've had the opportunity of being exposed and spending time with them. There is millions of talented people in the ANC. Millions, credible, talented people. The problem becomes this: how the system is designed, in a sense that there could be perverse incentives and interest that may weaken the ability of these people to be able to manage these institutions effectively. And secondly, that once they are in the system, they can get sucked themselves, and they now suddenly have other interest other than the interest and incentives of doing well. Because there are incentives that if you're a CEO of a public entity and you do well, the incentive is that you will be known that you have done well. That is motivation enough. Secondly, that you may now move from this one entity into another, even much more bigger, much more complex than the one that you are at. And in some cases, there will even be financial rewards. You know, the biggest incentive that your career would be on a trajectory of growth and so on. But because of these environmental issues, because, I joke, kuyashoda,
Kuyashoda.
Yeah, kuyashoda.
Kushoda kuphi? Kunyukela or kuphi?
No, kuyashoda. kushoda like, emaphaketheni, so what ends up
Or
happening.
ugcwalise.
Yeah, we also must, there are people who want to go to Dubai, they want to go to saloons. We also want to drink something.
This the mall, the
something-
highest, and
Yeah, something
I want to
better,
drive a certain car.
And then Botha comes and say, look, and it becomes an incentive, right? So that other
Uthini
incentive,
uBotha bakafika?
that other incentive
That,
of wanting a trajectory of growth in your career, doing well, making a name and serving society well.
So that this contradiction
is diverted by this other one that also, I can also have a soft life, right? And that's why then some of the most talented people get sucked into those types of things. And there are some who resist. And when they resist,
The consequences.
their consequences, they could end up, dead, or they could end up ruining their careers. And there's countless of those. So the point I'm making is, I have seen thousands of well-suited and well-meaning cadres in the ANC. There's a lot of them, countless. And there are some who've distinguished themselves. What we need to do is to deal with some of these systemic and societal issues, where I am a municipal manager and I get a negative audit opinion for 7 years and nothing happens to me.
No consequences.
No, yeah, in fact, I may even be getting bonuses.
For underperformance.
I may, because I'll try and explain how it is. And in fact, what do I have to do? I mean, it's even easier in a municipality. That's why there's more corruption than in the national level. I mean, nationally, it's very difficult for a minister to go to a DG and ask for Christmas. It's very, very difficult.
Very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, even the type of service providers you have and so on. At local government, it's relatively, the borders are kind of like porous.
Porous, yeah.
Because about calling a service provider and say, hey, the MMC or the mayor just need to have some good Christmas. But because the bigger issue is conspicuous consumption. Because there's a view.
This materialism.
There's a view that you can't be a DG, an MM, a CEO, a board chair, a minister, an MMC, and you drive a jalopy. There is that view in society that says power also must be seen in you, in a sense that your kids must go to a better school, the car you drive. And that's when you are.
And you can't go to Balabola.
Yeah, I mean,
you can't go to State Biko Hospital. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I saw this one young comrade the other day. We were sitting in a restaurant in Cape Town. And so he comes in and he says, and I was sitting with the two colleagues who are DGs. I'm being told by a young fellow, very young youth league fellow. He says to me, hey, DG, we are embarrassing us, man. Yeah. So what have I done now? I mean, on what account will you say that? He says, no, man, but this, because he sees there's a bottle of wine here. It's probably about 150 rands.
This is lower.
Yeah, so
it's below
says,
your.
You can't be DGs and you're embarrassing her. And he meant it, right? Because in society we've now accepted that if you're in this particular position, we must see in how you dress, we must see in what you drive, in what you eat, and that you must go on holiday and so on. And the consequence of it that we get sucked into that system. And all the talent that will have been witnessed by those who recommended me into the position vanishes. Of course, there is also no consequence management. As I am putting it to you, that I have seen people in positions where they consistently underperform and nothing happens to them. Even if it means you reskill them or you shift them around because they may even be misplaced. I have seen that. Not just people who are stealing. I'm saying people who are not stealing, who are trying their best, but they are underperforming because they are not suitable. They may be overwhelmed by this responsibility. In that instance, you may want to move them elsewhere, which is why I believe in the principle of rotation as well.
Is that why you left public service, go to UJ?
No, I'd given 20 years to government. I was feeling exhausted. I think if there was another arrangement of a sabbatical of 2 years, I would have taken it. So I left, not because I was despondent. I have great relationship. I'm actually currently spending a lot of time in government supporting departments with change management, strategy development, institutional design, and so on. I still do that, but I don't have the responsibility of being an accounting officer. It's very hard to be an accounting officer. And I work for a department which is partially self-funding. So I have to make sure that I invoice and I get paid 13 million rands minimum a month, because the NSG is partially self-funding because we charge fees to government departments. So every month I have to make sure that I issue invoices and that I get paid up to 13 million rands a month.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I was exhausted. I think I had served. I needed to take a break of about 2 years. If there was any other arrangement, unfortunately in government, there's no other arrangement, I could have considered it. So I left and joined the university.
I mean, you have edited about 11 books. Where do you find time?
That's a very common question.
Yeah.
So,
But you also have a family.
yeah.
How do you balance? Yeah.
Well, so there's different responses to that.
Mm.
I've edited 13 books.
Yeah.
I've got my soul book coming now, and I've got a novel.
What is it called, by the way?
Frontiers of National and Regional Development. I'm asking a question of what drives growth in developing countries.
Yeah. When is that
So it's
coming
a
up?
political economy book. It's coming out in the first week of March, and we'll do a launch at the University of Johannesburg.
Mm.
That book is a culmination of 5 years, and so on. So when the books that I edit, I have very long lead times. So I've got 2 edited books coming out this year.
This year, yeah.
These books, the manuscripts or the chapters in these books are about 2 years old.
Mm.
So I plan. So I can tell you now that each year for the next 3 years, I'll have a book coming out because I plan these things in advance. I identify people who will write, I cultivate, I arrange writing workshops, I engage intensely with them, and I give people sufficient time. Many of the people who've written chapters in the books I've edited went on to write their own books. I always make sure that 50% of people who contribute chapters are people who've never written before, because that's an intention that I have, bringing new voices into the mainstream. But the lead time is about 2 years at least. Where do I find time?
Mm.
So in the years I worked in government, we had to spend a lot of time in Cape Town. And that's what there was time there. So of course we would leave the office at 8 and go to the office the following day at 9. But a trip to Cape Town, you've got 4 hours to read the manuscript, 2 hours going, 2 hours coming back. So I will write an op-ed, a newspaper article in the 2 hours going to Cape Town. When I come back, I've finished it and I can send it to a newspaper. There was time. I traveled a lot in the country and abroad, and there was a lot of time that I used to do the writing. And so I maximized the opportunity of not being at home to be able to work on this. And currently, with the writing that I'm doing, I wake up at 3 a.m. when everybody is sleeping. So I have no problem of anyone complaining about their time because I wake up at 3 a.m. and I do my writing, and then I can then go to the office when everybody else goes to the office. And now I'm becoming more efficient, like traveling from here back home to Midrand. I just can record myself on my mobile phone. So I speak, it transcribes. So when I get home, I already have draft number 1 of a newspaper article by me speaking with AI on the phone, transcribing it. When I get home, I then put it on the computer and I edit it. So I'm using a lot more, of my time when I'm driving, thinking, by recording what I think, so that I can have those thoughts. So if I were to publish the op-eds I probably have done over 500 opinion pieces. I think I've got about 30 unpublished. That's if anytime I wanted to, I'll go back and publish them.
Maybe you need to publish my op-eds.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I can do that. I'm in a space now where, I'm in the academic space now, so I must publish and so on. But I'm in a space where I do think that, because I love stories, right? So
there's also a novel coming up.
Yeah, next year.
What is about what?
It's called Ntombentle, this novel. Yeah, it's about this.
What I thought about it's about love.
Ntombentle is beautiful. And she's not imaginary. I had met her, this Ntombentle. I had written a newspaper article about her. But this beautiful lady I met in Mhlabiyalingana in January 2000 when I was...
Mhlabiyalingana, that's your Jozini area.
Yeah. And in fact, I can promise you that she didn't use any extra, portion on me.
There were no inducement.
No.
Mhlabiyalingana is known for
no.
The portions there.
Yeah, but she's stuck in memory, because of the circumstance with the parents and the polygamy. I mean, this household I stayed in, I mean, I could have died there. I was doing a research field work. So we rented, I would say a bed in this rural homestead. The father who gave us space, we paid him a small fee. He was about to turn 40 years old, and he had 5 wives and 20 children.
Hmm. 5 wives, 20 children.
Yeah. I mean, he was only just 40.
Just
right?
40.
Yeah. So in the engagement, and then the daughter, the first one of elder daughter.
Of the 20, yes.
Is this one called Ntombendle. So we had an engagement. We spoke. I mean, she was young and so on. And what stuck with me was the fact that in the interviews we did in that community, there were these young girls, matriculants, whose dream was if they marry, if they are first or second wives, that their counterparts must not bewitch and kill them, right? So I thought, but you should be dreaming about going to school. There was TEFs at the time and so on. But that was their dream, these girls, that, if I marry the first or the second wife, because it's a very polygamous environment, that it must be someone who will embrace me and so on. And of course, because I was in a homestead, and I saw how these wives, the mothers, all of them embraced each other, I thought it was quite phenomenal. But I had no intention of writing about this until I met her in a flight to Cape Town, and she's from Hlabyalenga. So in that conversation, I said, man, I remember a family like this, and this. And halfway through, it then turns out that it was her. And she's a top lawyer, in Johannesburg and so on. So we spoke, and she refused to give me a number. She thought maybe I would have interest. But we spoke a lot. I learned a lot out of it. So I thought I would then write this novel called Ntombendle. Of course, I fictionalized it.
So next year we'll be talking more about Ntombendle. But then you said there is an upcoming book, your book, on regional. It's called the Frontiers of National and Regional Development. And you said it talks about the economy, it talks about development, am I right?
Yeah.
And then tell me, in that book, do you talk about or do you focus on other best practices that Africa could look up to and say this is best? Because we're always told, this Eurocentric approach. We're always told that everything best, everything that is non-corrupt comes from the West.
Well, yeah. So the book explores those topics, and I call them frontiers because these are things that are evolving. We are learning out of them. We must open vistas of knowledge and identify possibilities to drive a development agenda. So one of the things that I have learned, I've studied, and I'm observing in our own country and in the continent is that countries that have done well, especially the post-colonies, the countries that were oppressed, that were colonized, and so on, the countries that have done well are the countries that had what I call a developmental elite. This is elite, it is obsessed about national development. They're obsessed about moving society forward. And you find them in Asia, you find them in the Middle East, now you find them in Latin America. That's what concerns them, what preoccupies them is where their countries will be in the next 5 years. And that's the phenomena of a developmental elite that uses its power intellectually, politically, and financially to mobilize society towards particular national development goals. And they move with society forward. In some of these countries, they may be openly democratic, some of them are not. But one common thing about them is that if you go to their countries, like in the Middle East, there are countries like if we're in Dubai, we're in Shanghai, or we're in Bahrain, in fact, and even in Chile, you then get a sense of what I mean by a national development elite that is obsessed about the idea of national development, that the outcome of what they do is what happens to the country, as opposed to elites that are self-centered, elites that are amassing wealth, elites that are narcissistic, that are obsessed about how they look, about how people feel and think about them, elites that are obsessed about likes in social media and so on, as is the case, today. And so that is one of the things that the book is dealing with. And secondly, I go deeper into this idea of linking state capacity and growth, the relationship between the two. And in many of these countries that one has studied, and we theorize about it in South Africa, we need to perfect it, is this idea that institutions that have got capacity, intellectual, technical, and otherwise, tend to do better than those that do not have the capability. Of course, in some cases, we make a narrow argument or a narrow view of state capacity by looking at the resumes of people. And that this is not all and be it all. What matters is that if you have people who are qualified with resumes, if they are effectively managed, which is what we learned from Asia, Chile, and so on, that if these bureaucracies are effectively managed, they are mobilized, they will give you different outcomes, as we have seen in many African countries. So this relationship between state capacity, and growth applied in our context, because it's been theorized elsewhere, is something that is very important for us to look at. I also tease out this idea of ethics and growth and leadership and so on. And it goes back to this idea of an elite that is obsessed about development. And I'm making an argument in this book that we must look at ethics beyond whether or not money was stolen. We must deal with the ethic of working, the ethic of service, or what Christians will call like even a Protestant ethic, right? The fact that you are willing to sacrifice and do the work and graft and dirty your hands and sweat, as it were, as opposed to being obsessed with the position that you hold. And that we need to reach a point where we say, this person is unethical, not because the person is squandering resources, but because the person is not giving time required for this position and the responsibilities to succeed. So the ethic of being in a leadership position and watching water spillage, and it goes on and on and on for a week, right? That we need to have some kind of a different orientation. In other countries, they will call it embarrassment. Are you embarrassed that you are leading in this city, but these are the social and development outcomes in this city, right? And that we raise it as an ethical issue, because that's where we shift the debate away from using ethics to measure whether or not we are stealing, but to say watching and presiding over poverty is unethical. And so you change the definition, advance the definition of ethics beyond doing wrong things into dealing with indifference.
So you are not limiting it there.
Yeah,
You
dealing with
expand it.
indifference. Because when you see, garbage, when you see the institution you preside over, dilapidating, we must then say it is unethical of you to do so. We mustn't just say it's because we're not effective as a lead. Because when we call each other accountable, even using that standard, you may change how you relate to your own responsibilities, because it will then be seen to be unethical to have refuse not collected.
Is that what you're teaching MPs and government civil servants in your new role at UJ?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a program that we are running at UJ, and we're going to expand these programs. And there's also work I'm still doing with the National School of Government. I'm still a senior fellow of the National School of Government, so I still spend time there. It's my home, my second home, and I'll always continue to do work with them. And we've got programs on economic governance, which we've trained cabinets of other countries, in Zambia, in Cote d'Ivoire, we've been there, in Ghana, in Kenya. So I've had the privilege of convening economic governance school of cabinets from other countries, and I'm always asked, what about South Africa? We have trained some of those who have volunteered. We haven't done the whole of cabinet, but it's their own decision, it's their own problem that they don't want to do it. But certainly in these other countries that have done it, we're going to be doing follow-ups. Actually, I think in March, we're going to go to Burundi, where the president will convene a cabinet there. I think the National School of Government is making those final arrangements, and we'll go and engage them on how to effectively govern society. What are the outcomes of the decision that you make? Because oftentimes we are not asking that question. That you sat here as a leader, politically, deployed or appointed. What are the outcomes of your decisions? Because what do you do when you're a leader? You make decisions. You're not baking bread. You sit, you're in meetings, you talk, you walk around. On the basis of all of these activities, you make a decision. So what then becomes the outcome of this decision? And that's the best way of defining decision science, because every other engagement we are having, we are gathering data and evidence of what is possible to happen if you move this way or if you move that way.
Do you think?
And that's what we're going to be doing a lot more whilst I'm at UJ.
Yeah. Are you winning? I mean, I'm saying in the face of, there's this huge disproportionate level of looting, corruption, malfeasance, maladministration. Are the programs starting from National School of Government, moving to UJ, doing the work that we're doing, which is groundbreaking, and expanding it? Are you winning? Are there fruits? And I'm saying, bear in mind, Busani, that we have an avalanche of, you use the term,
Kuyashoda.
yeah. Are you winning? I want to back. When they look at this, the concept shorter, do they, yeah.
Well, look, I'll say yes and no. I think we are swimming against a much bigger tide. Much, much bigger tide. But I have been in instances where, by their own admission, those who've gone through our hands are able to say that they are looking at life and they are looking at their responsibilities differently. There is quite a number of them who say so.
So there is light at the end of the tunnel.
This is based on their own feedback. Now, let me hasten to tell you, we used to do evaluations at the National School of Government of the work we did. We found that for 2 streams of courses we implemented, we got the same feedback from students. Those are project management, and secondly, supply chain management. So when you do an online course at the NSG, you must do an evaluation before you can print the certificate. If you don't do an evaluation, it doesn't print. And of course, there will be other subsequent evaluations that the school will do. For these 2 streams of courses, junior officials in particular will answer the question, do you feel empowered? Do you think you can use what you have learned to great effect? Most of those who went through project management and supply chain said no. They said, it's good. I feel empowered. I think I can make a difference. I can manage project differently. I can manage procurement differently. However, in the environment where I come from, these systems won't work. Either because decisions on procurement are always predetermined. So the fact that I've learned how to manage procurement in this environment, I feel empowered myself, but I don't think I can make a contribution. They will say the same, those who are doing project management, that where I work, I will struggle to buy project management software, and I need it because I'm managing complex projects, or that those people are not going to agree to this type of change. Because to implement it, you need an institution-wide change to build a project management oriented ecosystem, which is why then even in the work that we're doing at the, where I am at UJ, the plans we have is that we're going to be designing programs that are dealing with ecosystem. so that when you train people on project management or in supply chain, if you took the whole SCM unit, you now have a group of people who have a similar understanding of what it means to design a spec, what it means to have segregation of duties, why the tender must be advertised like this, and what are the consequences of recommending an incompetent service provider. They can still do wrong things, but if we're doing it at a more systemic level, there might be different outcomes. Same as project management. When we have a project management ecosystem, you will have some who are highly specialized in managing projects, but others must also appreciate why certain information must be provided at a particular period because we need that for project control. So to make a much bigger impact, I'm therefore arguing, we need to go more institution-wide. We must be a little bit more systemic than picking up on volunteers. But I have learned, we have trained people, even at UJ, we're training people who actually are self-motivated by the idea of learning. The people who need it the most, they never show up. They never do. Those who need it the most, those whose lives depend on it, they don't. We get people who are highly trained, who can make quality. I mean, I don't want to use names, but that's the point. People who can actually be okay without coming to us. But they've got this constant desire to build their knowledge base. And then there are some, like people really who, and I say this openly, there are many people in leadership positions in South Africa who, if they were in China, they would be butlers. That's all they will do. They will be
Butlers that would be in the door.
Butler.
You'd be at the door.
There's a lot of people who should be receptionists who are leading institutions in South Africa. In China, they would be receptionists. There's a lot of them. And there's a lot of them who will never be a member of the Communist Party there. Because being a member is not like paying 12 rands and then voila, you're now a member. There are a lot of them.
You've got to go through the eye of the needle.
Exactly. Well, I mean, there is an eye of the needle. The problem that the needle is it's so big, the eye of the needle is so porous that it has become meaningless. That's the point.
I like this needle, it's so...
It's not only a needle, it's a tunnel. It's a tunnel, right? But it's so porous. It's a tunnel. Everything goes in it. You know?
So this needle is...
But there is a... Look, man, there is another reason why we are having this problem that we are having in South Africa. And of course, you know, it goes both ways. For as long as the economy underperforms, it means there's fewer opportunities being created. What it means is a person who in a normal economy will be a machine operator is a councillor today. In fact, could be a mayor. That in a normal economy, this is a person who ought to be driving or controlling a CNC machine in a factory producing something. People who will have worked at Unilever or Lever Brothers, who will have worked in a shoe factory in Pietermaritzburg, who will have worked in a card making trim factory in East London, people who will have worked in a factory making brake pads in Kabeja, those people are wearing a mayoral chain.
Yeah, my daughter works at Unilever. She may not take kind to this, you know.
Well, look,
yeah, she works at Unilever. I don't know. I don't know if the producers will cut this. Imagine.
No, she shouldn't. Because I mean, look, man, the point about it is that those are highly skilled people, right? To work there, you are not a cleaner. To work there, you have to be highly skilled, highly trained, even if you're an artisan. Because everybody who works in a production system there is highly trained. And you must be certified. I was telling someone 2 weeks ago that in a mine, the lowest ranked job in a mine is to be a rock drill operator. To be a rock drill operator, you must be certificated. Even if you left school at standard 5. You have to learn and study that machine and be certificated. We are using your power, manpower. You need a certificate to be a rock drill operator. So you are skilled on this particular machine that we are using. Of course, there is medicals because of issues of first aid, emergency, accidents, and what have you. There is a particular skill. The point then is in a political system where you can enter without any type of capital or skill that we are bringing, where even if we are bringing the experience, if you look at the founders of the ANC, looking at the experience of organizing people. And we are known that you can organize people because we're organizing churches, civics, and so on. You may lead today without any experience, even of leading a branch, because you need a different mechanism of stepping into the thing. So this example of a factory is important because to be in that position, because they are highly regulated, remember, especially in the production line. To be in that position, you need to have been certificated, even if it meant you spent 1 day learning first aid. So you can do CPR. You will know what happens when this alarm rings. In politics, there are many people who don't know what to do when a particular alarm rings. And alarms do ring. When State SA issues statistics on employment, there's an alarm ringing. When
The levels of poverty.
exactly. So the alarms in society ring every day. And you will have people who are leading in society who don't know what to do when the alarm
They are not
rings.
in tune.
Whereas in a factory, in a mine, when an alarm rings, they will know that this particular alarm means evacuate.
Danger is coming.
Danger is coming. So we have to prepare then. I'm very optimistic that the work that we do is prepare leaders of society to know the alarms that are reading and what they mean, but also to know how you can prevent the alarm from being triggered and to know what to do when the alarm has gone off. Because if we don't give them those capabilities, the house will burn down whilst they are inside. And we see the signs in communities. And you end up having the type of political outcomes that you have because they are not hearing the alarm.
How did we get here?
Yeah, this is a very tricky question. I've thought about it and I've tried to be scientific in explaining how we got here. And there's different reasons for it. But there's one that it may be offensive to others, but these are objective facts. So if you profile the first cabinet of Nelson Mandela, who was in cabinet, what was their background, what was their experience, what was their social capital, what was their disposition, what were they concerned about, you'll find that these are people who have been in prison or exile or in civics. They hated apartheid, they hated oppression, and they were willing to sacrifice, and they stayed in every apartment government gave them and drove in any car and so on. And you'll hardly hear the type of stories you'll hear today about blue light and so forth. And they tended to be mature age people. Then the first term of Mbeki, you have a maintenance of that. These are very matured individuals and so on. But demographics change. In fact, you can even look at this at the ANC level and then in cabinet and government and so on. And then come 2004, the profile begins to shift, becoming relatively more younger. But in this instance, 2004, it also coincides with a sharp growth in the middle class. And this growth in the middle class, it meant that you now had Black people who were driving black saloon, black SUVs faster. The lifestyles were changing, we were affording things differently, and so on. And these politicians, the age profile is getting younger as there's this social dynamic taking place. They themselves are beginning to develop tastes for what they see in society. Then we move to 2009. The profile changes even further, demographically, the age and so on. And some of the battles that the DGs are starting to have is backlash about the type of cars that these ministers want to drive. You now see a 7 Series was only driven by the head of state. You're now seeing even ministers in a BMW 7 Series, what was previously only driven by the presidency, as it were. And so they are starting, and the middle class has grown. So they're starting also to live this life that is being lived by other people in society who are black middle class, because they themselves are part of the middle class because they are privileged, they're an elite serving in the executive, at national, as well as in other structures. And there's many stories in of DGs, especially 2014 now, where the profile changes even further, where they fight with their ministers about cars, the type of cars. Later, when cabinet decides to reduce the maximum amount, I think at some point it was about 890, it meant that you could now only afford, as most of them do now, you can most ministers are driving an X3 and a Q5 and other type of mini SUVs, not an X5 because it's above the threshold. When these shifts were happening, some of the fights between heads of departments were about this thing because they wanted to drive that. Why? They wanted to drive the Land Rover, the Range Rover, because their peers were driving that car, that car outside. What does this thing mean? It means that as tastes grow now and they diversify, and we are no longer steeped in the politics and the ethic that bound those people in the first and the second and so on, it means that there are possibilities that if they are short, then someone may want to actually augment because we are short, and so on. And so as these other people are supplementing and augmenting, then there's a possibility that you will find yourself in trouble because they are shorter and you needed to then augment. It's one of the things that have happened, in my view, that the changes in society with conspicuous consumption becoming rampant, it's a defining feature of success in South Africa, that you must consume and you must consume publicly. And that because we are in power and privilege, and that those who then serve in the executives in all the three spheres and CEOs and even board members themselves want to live exactly the same life as the CEO of a bank who gets a bonus that is 10 times their salary, everywhere. Because we live in the society, we live in the same spaces. So the incentive changed during this period. I am not making an excuse for modern politicians that they are doing wrong things, those who do wrong things, because society is a society that has got a predisposition for doing wrong things. But I'm just putting one of the reasons why, in my view, I think this has been the case. And I bet you can ask the longest serving DGs, they will tell you the type of discussion they will have had about cars or even about cutlery and crockery in their offices, and even about carpets and flowers, and even about flying first class and business class. And then later, when these rules were changed. So the changing nature of the demographics inside, together with is happening outside, they coincide to produce these outcomes. Of course, at a political party level, I don't need to say more because a lot also went wrong with the porous borders at a political party level, where, as I am saying, that the path towards being in a position of power is not the path that will have been passed and crossed and traversed by someone who is a trade-tested artisan at Unilever, where you have to go through each and every step before you get a license to operate that machine. In this instance, it was just a leap, and we are suddenly operating this political machine in a mega institution, and nothing prepared you for it because there was no incentive. We had to get into it by being able to say Amandla, and everybody listens, everybody hears you, respects you, and you move here into here. Whereas in a factory, you will have to go through these different steps for you to qualify to have a license to operate that machine. So we have many people who do not have the license to operate the political machine today.
But what Professor has been doing to us is his openness, his ability to accept that there are huge failings, there are huge problems, that individuals in certain positions are there, they're not supposed to be there. I hope you appreciate how huge it is, the problem that we're facing in our country. Problems of governance, problems of leadership, problems where individuals are narcissistic. Individuals, it's always about them. Individuals who always ask us the question, "Sidla nini, sidla kuphi?" Where are the easiest opportunities to steal, hoping that we would be able, as a country, as a continent, to look back and say there are possibilities that we are not just a dark continent, that you can always, we cannot always look at the West as proper models of governance. It's people like Professor Busani who, in the work that they do at UJ, University of Johannesburg, and the work that they do at the School of Governance, that there is this glimmer of hope. But it can only be there when you do the right thing at the right time. So this discussion was all about ethics, about leadership, which is complex, which is intricate. I hope that we would be able, as South Africans, to know that when you are a leader, you are there to serve and not to service your stomach. Prof, thank you for coming. Thank you for honoring us. Really appreciate it. Wish you well in your new role at UJ, and as you continue with a School of Governance to ensure that South Africa must succeed. It can only succeed with people like you who really are out there to service. Thank you so much once again.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me. Issues of success, we don't have a choice. There's a professor at in Singapore who, in a public debate with another professor who's my host professor in Shanghai, said China succeeds because of government. And he says India succeeds in spite of government. And he then asked me to respond about South Africa, whether South Africa succeeds because of government or succeeds in spite of government, or whether it succeeds at all. I couldn't respond to him. I said I'll go do a lot more in-depth research on this and come back to it. But on the issues of success is very important. And we must be clear about what success looks like. In the majority of cases, we are unsure about what success looks like. And as a consequence, we then see everything as either as being failure or as being success. And of course, because we are unable even to communicate our own successes, the ANC government as a country, it makes the plight of people even worse. So people, they wouldn't recognize, even when they are sitting in a comfortable chair, that the government has assisted them to put that cushion into that chair, because we are not communicating it effectively. And all the wrong signals we send then makes it worse for everybody. But thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is Tea with Botha.